Welcome to Uncommon Knowledge. I'm Peter Robinson. Andrew Breitbart grew up in Los Angeles, then attended Tulane University. He helped to edit the Drudge Report and was a developer of the Huffington Post. The author of a book entitled Hollywood Interrupted, Insanity Chic in Babylon, The Case Against Celebrity. Mr. Breitbart now manages two of his own sites on the internet, Breitbart.com and a cultural and political site called Big Hollywood. His abiding concern is the politics of Hollywood, which he views as a problem and which he intends to correct. Segment 1, Insanity Chic. Andrew Breitbart, I'm quoting you, in a newspaper interview he gave last year discussing the people who run Hollywood. Quote,
Uh-oh.
Yes, quote, I'm telling you they're uninteresting, they're vicious, they're vitriolic, they're really, really not good people, and I'm willing to say that on the record, close quote. Is there any of that you regret?
No.
What makes them really, really not good people?
Well, I'm not saying the entirety, but the ones who have controlled Hollywood for the last 40 years, that quote could be attributed to the campus left as well. It could be attributed to people who are in charge in Venezuela right now. Anywhere where the left gets control, you start to see political correctness run amok. You start seeing dissenting views quashed. They use projection. Right before they do so, they start attacking the people that they're about to go after of being guilty of the very things that they do. That's why the dissent is patriotic meme was so hysterical during the during Bush's presidency, because whenever I would ask any of these people, can you name one person who has attempted to quash your dissent? And they would usually say...
The liberals.
The liberals right. Would say that. They couldn't come up with any individuals. They'd just say, you've got to be crazy. It's everywhere. Well, exactly where is that? The first thing that this president did... that the President Obama did was isolate Rush Limbaugh, who was a symbol of a coalescing anti-Obama sentiment, and he isolated him, and the mainstream media and Hollywood, completely got behind this. That to me was chilling. That the Bill Maher's of the world, the Joy Behar's of the world, the entirety of MSNBC, all went after Rush Limbaugh. He hadn't said anything at that moment in time that was anything that was outrageous at all, especially compared to what had been said for the 8 previous years.
He was guilty only of a political crime. He disagreed with them and said so vividly.
Right.
And that was it. Listen, historical question. Golden age of Hollywood, which it wasn't all that long ago. We measured in decades, not centuries after all. Producers, Jack Warner of Warner Brothers was a Republican. Directors, Frank Capra, immigrant from Sicily, a Republican and a conservative. He produces movies such as It's a Wonderful Life, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. The town in those days produced movie after movie after movie that was fundamentally affirming about American life, fundamentally affectionate even about American life. How did Hollywood go from Republican David Selznick, who produced Gone with the Wind, to liberal David Geffen? What happened?
Well, 2 things. The studio system ended, and now the celebrities are in charge.
Okay, explain both of those. Studio system ended. What bearing did that have on the politics?
Well, there were people. Actors have always been held in low regard by society, and the businessmen who ran the studios, cleaned up after their messes around town. I mean, that's sort of the L.A. Confidential movie. That changed in the 1960s to a great extent. But I would attribute the majority of this to the Cultural Revolution in the late 1960s, and that at the end part of John Wayne's career, he no longer had the swagger. He was 60-something years old. The movies were no longer original. They were doing the same hackneyed thing over and over and over. Right. And simultaneously, there's a youth revolution going on in the country. And while the left was never able to take over the White House while George McGovern was not able to be victorious, Hollywood was taken over by the left, and they've never relinquished it. And in fact, I would argue that the right has abdicated its place in Hollywood because they were told that you're not wanted here anymore, and they never fought for it. So I don't know who I have more contempt for, the left for its totalitarian behavior towards those that disagree with them, or the right, the conservative movement, for just allowing for it to happen and not to fight back.
Segment 2 is, what difference does it make? Let me quote you again. Andrew Breitbart, the popularity of American movies, I'm quoting you, quote, allows for a very parochial political sensibility in this town, Hollywood, to be propagated around the world. And people just assume, well, that's Hollywood, that's the voice of the American people, close quote. So Hollywood is messing up our foreign policy. It's more subtle. Give me what difference does it make that Hollywood is so far to the left? It's a small community, a few thousand lefties running the entertainment business, so what?
Well, I mean, would you hire, if Madison Avenue is willing to hire an actor and give him $1 million to sell Sapporo beer in Japan, that actor must be worth that money because they're going to get the audience to buy that specific brand of beer. When the collective of Hollywood sends a message to the rest of the world that affirms the worst narrative about the United States, that only tells half of the story, or perhaps not even half of the story, it ends up having a net effect, especially when a left-leaning European press, their sensibilities are in simpatico. And what I think is at play is a lot of insecure actors who didn't go to college and feel intimidated by people of a higher intellect, take their movies to Cannes or San Sebastian, and they find themselves not around the working class of France or Spain. They find themselves around the elite of the elite of the elite. And they're foolish enough to suppose that just because they smoke their cigarettes like this, French critics are superior somehow.
Right.
Well, look, there is such a limitation of the point of view that comes out of Hollywood, especially on political movies these days. But even movies like Wolverine that's out right now, I
haven't seen it yet, but my teenage boys came home.
There's the bad guy in the movie is a repressed military guy who has who in one subliminal scene has a little cross on, his lapel, and
or the James Bond, what's his name, Daniel Craig, the nude Bond?
Yeah.
The second Bond movie, which I rented the other evening. The bad guy, it's unbelievable.
Right. Well, it's
the Americans
nonstop.
are trying to take over Bolivia.
There are two, look, you cannot get a film produced now that has Islamist terrorists. You can get movies produced. In fact, you see them all over the place in which people of traditional values or corporations, American corporations, are the bad guys. And I know people within the system who tell me how this plays out. One thing I've been able to find out over the last 10 years is more money now comes from foreign box office, 65% to 35%. That wasn't always the case.
You make most of your money on your foreign releases.
So you're catering to the foreign audience, and so we may have we may have an investment against radical Islam, but the rest of the world wants to kind of keep at bay and doesn't want to take them on, doesn't want to foment rage against that community.
Domestic politics. In the 2008 election cycle, the entertainment industry contributed $47 million to political campaigns, $36.5 to Democrats, $10.4 to Republicans. So Hollywood contributes to Democrats over Republicans by a margin of about 4 to 1, which suggests that few thousand people who live down there on the coast of California and Los Angeles and environs exerts an enormous influence over one of the nation's great national parties.
Yeah, the first job I took in Los Angeles was working for a producer, and he asked me to take Senator Frank Lautenberg around, and I took him to Don Henley's house, and the senator from New Jersey came out and said, hey, he's going to do a fundraiser for me. He's going to perform, and all the celebrities are going to come. And I started to figure out how this system works. What does New Jersey have to do with Don Henley in Los Angeles? That's fine and good if that's legal. But what I find offensive in this system is that the conservatives that I know in Hollywood, and there are a lot, cannot give money because through a simple FEC search, their names will come up as Republicans, and then the word will spread around town that they're Republican, and there is a strong likelihood that many people who would have ordinarily hired them will not hire them. And thankfully, that behavior was put on display after Proposition 8, because now the American people...
Prop 8, remind folks, Prop 8 was just on the ballot here in California a few months ago.
It was the anti-gay marriage initiative.
Right.
Those people who donated as little as $100 were isolated.
Donated as little as $100 to the effort
to the tradition on behalf of the traditional marriage stance.
Right. The pro man and woman means marriage side.
Right.
Okay.
Religious people, Mormons, many from the black community, many from the Hispanic community in California voted this in. The gay left isolated those people who voted, who gave money to that, even down to a cashier at a famous Hollywood haunt by the name of El Coyote, and didn't just isolate her, but they isolated the entire restaurant in order to put pressure on her to fire her. That happens all the time.
They put individuals' names up on websites.
Yes. At a more subtle level, that is what's been going on in Hollywood for years. I get phone calls all the time from major name actors fearful of retribution, that their politics have somehow been outed, whether it be from a donation that they've given or the fact that they were seen at a public or a semi-public event that could be attributed to the Republican Party.
All right. Segment 3, who is Andrew Breitbart? Washington television producer Tammy Haddad. Andrew Breitbart is, quote, one of the 10 most important people in the media whom nobody has ever met. Close quote. So let's take a moment to introduce you. I said at the introduction, you grew up in LA, you went to Tulane. Get us from Tulane to editing the Drudge Report.
Well, I was a C student in high school and in college, and I think that saved me from indoctrination in the left.
All right.
I went to...
You went to a pretty fancy prep school down there, didn't you?
I did, but all I got away with there was my sense of humor. I sneaked my way around classes, you know.
So were you conservative in high school, or
I wasn't ideological during the Reagan years. My parents, in hindsight, were conservative but didn't speak of their conservatism, and so they allowed for me to sway into the realm of the left in my latter years in high school. I would say I was a namby-pamby liberal, and in college I certainly considered myself a liberal Democrat. It wasn't until I graduated.
So what changed your politics? You came home from Tulane straight back to LA, right?
That my mindset was not amenable to working within the system. I thought that the system was inherently corrupt, and eventually I realized I needed to make a living. So that was that. Then I lived in a rent-controlled apartment, and I started to see how what it did to people's souls, quite frankly. People who thought that they were, you know, making out like bandits, saving $400, $500, $600 a month, 10 years later were still there and weren't entering the American dream. My family members who still live in that apartment when I've bought 2 houses since then and been able to move up the scale. So
because they couldn't surrender the little gimme from the welfare state.
That's right.
Subsidized apartment.
And that old ladies would knock on my door at midnight because they knew that my family owned the building, but I certainly wasn't benefiting from it other than I was getting, you know, the low rent. Would say, you need to change the light bulb in my apartment. There was a sense of entitlement that was palpable in that place. And I just started to have, you know what, I'll tell you the thing that really changed me, because for me, and we haven't even touched on it, everything to me is media bias. And that media bias for me was born of watching during this period of transition from college life and the theoretical life to the real world. And I watched the Clarence Thomas hearings from beginning, middle, and end because I'd gone to the Iran-Contra hearing, rooting the Reagan administration on, you know, be taken down. So I liked political theater. Right. So I watched that initially rooting for Clarence Thomas to be taken down. By the very end, I believed the seeds of my future were planted right there when I realized that Ted Kennedy knew something. What did he know? That he could ask Clarence Thomas these questions of a man who came from humble beginnings as an African American. What did he know about the media? What did he know about the political process? What did he know about Hollywood? That they would side with a known Lothario, with Chappaquiddick, in his background, that they would allow for him and his allies in the Democratic Party to ask this man, in the realm of privacy, have you ever rented any pornography? Do you know who Long Dong Silver is? It was so obvious that this was a takedown that eventually I started to see things through what I call the Democrat media complex.
Okay, now hold on. You helped Arianna Huffington develop the Huffington Post. So you're now here as
Awkward.
a leading conservative in Hollywood, and you helped produce possibly the leading liberal website. Explain yourself, Andrew.
Am I squirming?
Not enough for me.
Okay. My first job within the realm of politics, I tripped upon it, and I became Arianna Huffington's director of research. I was her researcher. I helped her with her columns and helped her with books and stuff like that. And
She was already liberal.
And she was a conservative then. She was a conservative.
She was in motion by then. Right?
I don't know. I don't know what was going on in her head. I certainly was.
Right.
I certainly was a conservative then. And the first thing that we did together, the first project, and I really gained an enormous amount of respect for her writing skills and her
she's a highly intelligent.
right, and her investigative skills when she got Clinton's top donor, Larry Lawrence, dug up from Arlington National Cemetery. I remember Maureen Dowd saying, "This is the most loathsome thing that I've ever seen a conservative Republican do, is to impugn this war hero's service, this dead man's service." And Arianna just had this smile on her face, like she knew that she had it. And when I watched that Friday, an aerial view of CNN disinterring this fraud.
I can't. Because he had not actually served.
No,
right,
he didn't even serve.
He was not entitled to be buried in Arlington.
Right, and he had gotten a waiver because he was the first person allegedly in the Merchant Marines. He wasn't even in the Merchant Marines. So she got him disinterred. I respected the hell out of her for that. She switched. I left, went my own way. Next thing I know, she calls me up after the 2004 election and says, do you have any ideas for a website for me? The idea, its premise, I think benefited her, and I think it benefits my side, because I wanted the world to see how the far left thinks. The cocktail parties that I was, privy to, where conspiracy theories were running amok. The only place one could see in the blogosphere after 9/11 and after the Kerry campaign, after the Kerry lost, was at the Daily Kos, where mostly anonymous people would put their ideas down. I thought it would be great to see how the hard left thought, with people who would be willing to put their names down. Huge miscalculation here.
Segment 4. Who's winning on the internet? You've teed this up. Daily Kos, MoveOn.org, Democratic Underground, Huffington Post. They dominate the internet, wouldn't you agree, or not? Or do you think it's relatively evenly balanced? The left is ahead, isn't it?
I would say the left is ahead, because what all of those sites do is protect the mainstream media. Before those sites became dominant and the mainstream media granted them an authority that they didn't grant the equivalent blog sites on the right, these sites are there to protect them from future Swift boat stories, to protect them from future Dan Rather stories, because these stories would start rising through the right-wing blogosphere, and people on the left were thinking, we don't want this story to make it to the mainstream media. And so they expected that John Kerry would come out and defend himself against the Swift boat vets. And when he didn't, he was destroyed. And so that's what these people do in a very coordinated fashion, with George Soros's money, with heavy coordination with the Democratic Party. They feed these people information. They feed them ideas.
So the bad stories get smothered on the internet before they make it to television.
Yes,
or the news.
yes.
Listen, let me ask you a question about the nature of two media. On talk radio, conservatives are dominant. Al Franken, they try to get Air America going. I believe Air America is still limping along in some form or other, but they can't get the listenership, they can't get the advertising. On conservative talk radio, you've got Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, Hugh Hewitt, Mark Levin, a number of people prospering, right? Mm-hmm. And you've just argued that on the internet, it's the other way around, that the left is dominant on the internet. Why? What is it about talk radio and the internet that permits that?
I think that the writing in the right-wing blogosphere is much better. I would put my side against Ariana's any day. I would put National Review versus Democrat Underground any day. I think that that's scientifically provable. But in terms of its effect, the right-wing blogosphere no longer has the ability to do what it did in 2004 before the coordinated online environment of the left became so successful. I need to talk about why talk radio works for the right and why it doesn't work for the left. It's a pretty simple, if you took away media bias from the equation, Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity's ratings would fall. The existence if the subtext of every single story is media bias. They're consuming the media and then they're analyzing and they're showing this is what they're saying, but this is what's really happening out there. And when you are on the left, when the media is so on your side, to try to pretend that the media bias goes the other way, you're going to fall on your face after 2 hours of doing talk radio. You can't do 3 hours of talk radio every single day saying that channel 360 out of 1,000 on your DirecTV dial is the bane of humanity.
Okay, so Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity and Hugh Hewitt are premised on reality, and Air America was not. There's a media reality that they're responding to.
Right.
Okay, Big Hollywood. Why did you found it, and what do you hope to accomplish?
Well, it's by far
BigHollywood.com, right?
No, it's a very complicated URL. But
Sorry about that. Just Google on Big Hollywood and
we
Breitbart.
We are creating
everybody.
a series of group blogs. This happens to be the first one.
Okay.
Big Hollywood begets Big Education next. We're going to do Big Race, Big Climate. We're going to do the group blog model and
when you say we here, you're being.
Well, I have a business partner. I have a business partner by the name of Larry Solov, who graduated from this lovely campus, and every C student needs an A student in his life.
To be his lawyer?
That's right.
All right, so Big Hollywood. Start with Big Hollywood. By the way, you said you were contemptuous of conservatives in Hollywood.
Well, I'm not contemptuous of conservatives in Hollywood. I said I'm contemptuous of the movement.
Explain that, and then tell me how what Big Hollywood has to do with that contempt, remedying that.
That we have accepted our gilded ghetto of National Review, Weekly Standard, all of the think tanks, that we think that alone is enough to win elections, when it's so obvious
the last election proved otherwise.
Right, that pop culture matters. So I'm not blaming the holdouts. Right. I am not blaming the holdouts in Hollywood, and there are a lot of them. As a matter of fact, they need more help, and that is precisely why Big Hollywood was created.
Explain Big Hollywood.
Well, when I wrote with Mark Ebner Hollywood Interrupted in 2003. It came out in 2004. It was a reaction to, and this is before the Iraq War, so I'm not going to accept the narrative that the Hollywood left stood behind George Bush and the United States during Afghanistan or after 9/11 in solidarity. This was born from watching how the Bush chimp Hitler, all the commander and thief.
That had already started before Iraq.
It started certainly before Iraq. It started before he was, he took the office. But in Hollywood, the animosity towards a wartime president before Iraq was out of control, and so that was why the book was written. And I had my incorrect assessment is that Hollywood is 99.9% left. What I now know, as a result of having written the book, and now people knowing that I'm the guy out there in the center
The target.
blogosphere, people have come to me. Big name people have come to me. Small people have come to me. All of them have the exact same story. And what I talked about in the first segment about they accuse you of what they're doing to you. Hollywood makes movies about McCarthyism, about it was the worst thing that ever happened in Hollywood, or in the Cold War. That's their takeaway from the Cold War, that a few screenwriters, had to write under pseudonyms for a few years. That's not to take away. That's not to say that the blacklist was a good or a bad thing, but for the very people who for the last 40 years have been vicious to people who disagree with them, who exude behavior like that you see Perez Hilton doing against Miss California, when he calls her the B and the C word, and the media affirms that and makes her out to be the bad guy in that storyline. That's what the average actor, director in Hollywood has to deal with every single day.
Segment 5. Andrew Breitbart's politics. President Obama's just finished his first 100 days. What do you make of it? I'm asking you, here's Hollywood, here's the nation. Talk for a moment about the nation. What are your politics?
You know what? I'm definitely very conservative. The transition was a typical one where I thought I was a libertarian, but the more that I read books that were deprived of me during my college experience,
right.
Ones that should be required reading just so that people have a counterpoint. Once I started reading what true conservatism was, and that it wasn't Jerry Falwell's, autobiography, which is how the media portrays conservatism. That it's Hayek, it's Kirk, it's Burke, it's writers that wowed David Mamet into becoming a conservative, because he too, at that high end of the media food chain, of the Hollywood food chain, had the same epiphany.
Has David Mamet had to pay any price, or is he so big? That he hasn't had to pay a price for becoming
That's a great question. I think when you're a David Mamet or a Michael Crichton who just died, that your legacy is everything. Michael Crichton was an incredible figure, not just in Hollywood. He's a huge pop cultural figure. His death could not have gone more unnoticed because of his apostasy on Hollywood's current big issue, and that is climate change. Right. And so I believe his legacy is tainted because the New York Times will put him below the fold.
I'm trying to get you going on national politics, but the truth is, just talk about Hollywood is irresistible.
Well, what I'll say is this. Yeah. Being the Hollywood conservative, I defer to the DC crowd when it comes to policy. I'm not a policy guy. But what I am obsessed on, and I'm granted a great perspective of media bias because of what I've done in the media, my relationship with the New York Times, the Associated Press, what is the traditional media, ABC, NBC, every single day paying attention to the text and realizing, oh my goodness, these people really are ideological, and they really are in control, and they really do mean business. Everything to me is media bias. And what talk radio has done has focused on the New York Times, the AP, HBO, and any place where The View, ABC, CBS, NBC, Los Angeles Times, the mainstream media. Our media has set its sights on the mainstream media as a checks and balance, and we've done a pretty good job.
Right.
What we haven't done is that on Hollywood, and Hollywood has a far greater sway than that collective does. That's how people...
You for sure want to call Hollywood on its bias. That's clear. Mm-hmm. It's clear that you've done a fantastically energetic job doing that. But you also have said in interviews that you won't be satisfied until the culture of Hollywood actually changes. So it's not enough for you just to hold up a sign with a big finger pointing to them and saying, hypocrites. You actually want to... So, here's a question. Listen to this list of movies that came out in 1939 and even 7 decades ago. Gone with the Wind, The Wizard of Oz, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Artistic classics, fundamentally affectionate and celebratory of American life. Even Dorothy in the opening sequence in the Wizard of Oz, where Kansas is black and white and the environment is rather gray and withered, she can't wait to go home. There's no place like home, which means, in effect, Hollywood is saying there's no place like America. Can those days ever come back?
I don't know, and I think the same question people are asking right now with politics and referring to Ronald Reagan. But I think that there are bedrock principles that conservatives stand by, and I think that creativity and new people carrying these ideas, there's no reason that we can't go back to an America that is self-assured and confident in our differences from those countries around the world. What I stand for politically is American exceptionalism.
Let me ask you 2 sentences, 3 sentences at the very most, because we are out of time. I'm going to quote you once again. I desperately want to change the environment in Hollywood. In 2 or 3 sentences, how will you know when you've succeeded, Andrew?
When those people who are conservative in my life, who are very creative and powerful in that town, can behave in the same fashion that the Hollywood left behaves in, that they can make movies that reflect their value system, that they can make movies that affirm their traditional values. I'm not even a social conservative. I just want those people to be able to make movies that affirm their point of view, and they can't right now. And when I see those people being able to do it without the retribution that you're seeing right now by the left writ large, I will not stop this crusade.
Andrew Breitbart of Breitbart.com and Big Hollywood, thank you. I'm Peter Robinson for Uncommon Knowledge at the Hoover Institution. Thanks for joining us.